All right, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to our second CRD Connect and Communicate webinar of September. My name is Elliot Rose and I am a STEM librarian at Penn State University at University Park. And my co-moderator today is Rebecca Thompson, who is an instruction and reference librarian at King's College. Today's session is titled Change Management Strategies for Library Workers. Our presenter, Courtney McAllister, will talk about how library workers have an established track record of leveraging change to foster innovation and growth. She will discuss the benefits of incorporating intentional change management and explore practical strategies that can really help library workers plan and evaluate change, engage colleagues and decision makers, and manage the interpersonal and emotional labor of the change process. Courtney has spent over a decade working in public and academic libraries, going from a shelver to an electronic resources librarian. She now works as a senior solution architect at Adapon, where she applies her reference interview and library technology troubleshooting skills to build websites for academic publishers. Change management has been both a practical and theoretical through line throughout her career. She has authored Change Management for Library Technologies, a LIDA guide, and continues to research and present on change topics. Courtney lives in Philadelphia with her house panther baby bear and a shelf of unfinished craft projects. For today's presentation, you only need a headset or speakers, and we encourage you to ask questions in the chat box at the bottom right corner of the screen throughout the discussion. We are recording the session, and once it has been captioned, it will be uploaded to the PALA Connect and Communicate blog page. This session is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division's Connect and Communicate series. And if you are interested in being involved or learning more about this initiative or community, then we would love to hear from you. So now I am done talking and I'm going to pass it on to our lovely presenter.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I am so delighted to be here today. Um, I thank you for the opportunity. I found this logo for the series. I hope it's still the correct one. I hope this is still the branding you're using. Excellent. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and participate in this really wonderful and robust workshop series. I'm really excited to be here and to talk about both my most and least favorite topic, which is change. As Elliot kindly mentioned, I am a senior solution architect at Adapon. I've worked a lot in different libraries and in a lot of different roles. I've done pretty much everything but cataloging and archiving. And that's really been a gift, having that wide range of experiences, because I've seen a lot of changes happen at different levels and in different kinds of organizations. And kind of my general takeaway, which will inform a lot of what we discuss during this session, is that change is inescapable. Regardless of your personal role in your organization, what type of library you work in, what level of authority you have, changes are ongoing. And often in libraries, especially, we deal with multiple changes at once. And this can cause a lot of pressurized situations and compressed timelines and all of the complexities surrounding that. But that's one reason why I'm so excited to talk about this today with you all. So change management is a huge topic. This is, the literature on change management goes back for decades. There's a lot of great literature out there. For our purposes today, I wanted to try to kind of scope things into a more manageable subset of topics and areas, especially because I want to allow for plenty of time for Q&A at the end of our session today. So I want to begin with a brief overview of change management as kind of a theory. Um, my goal is to give everyone a foundational awareness of change management. Some folks here may know more, may be more experienced with it. Some people may not have read about it recently, or it could be brand new to you. I want everyone to just have a shared understanding for our discussion today. And then if you want to dig in further, hopefully some of the concepts or the names that I mention are, seeds that you can cultivate on your own kind of inquiry. I'll also be sharing some resources at the end of the presentation. Again, if you're curious about this or think it might be something that would benefit your work or your research, just to kind of help cultivate those seeds if that's applicable for you. Um, After kind of that overview, I want to talk about what library change specifically looks like. A lot of the discourse on change management is focused on other industries, so business, health sciences, economics, right? How do we translate that into the work we do in libraries and the information ecosystem? So I want to talk a bit about that. And then what strategies can help us? What do we glean from change management that's actionable, that's not a lot of just kind of abstract theory, what helps us get through our days, essentially. That's not a glamorous way to put it, but authentically, that is kind of the point that I'm trying to pursue here. So change management, often abbreviated as CM in the literature, just to give you kind of an overview of this theory, this discourse, maybe a better way of describing it. My definition of change management is a collection of processes and models to help structure organizational adaptation. No matter what kind of organization you work in, things are never static. The resources that you use, the expectations of the end consumer, the workflows that are being employed to get a deliverable out the door, all of these things have a lot of variations, a lot of permutations, and are constantly going to be shifted around. So that inevitability of change is a big part of the drivers here. But organizations can't fall apart every time something different has to happen. So, how do we meaningfully adapt? How do we shift our culture so that the new thing no longer feels like a kind of a deviation and is just, oh, this is what we do now, and we can have that feeling of continuity, and we can maintain momentum. So that's kind of how I define change management. You'll find a lot of more eloquent explanations out there, but that's how I think of it. So there are a number of change models that various people and researchers have devised, and they're all very useful. If it's something you're interested, I encourage you to kind of look through different examples and find the one that just kind of resonates most with the work you're doing and the change as it's unfolding for your organization. But generally speaking, those change models are going to outline the interaction between different components of a change process within an organization, your objectives. So, like, what are our goals? What are we trying to achieve? Buy-in is another thing that you'll see a lot. Buy-in is engagement, investment, how committed people are to a change. You need some kind of conviction and advocacy for it in order to get momentum. And that will pertain specifically to the kind of traction, the efficiency, how quickly we're able to move through the tasks in front of us. And then morale. Morale, I think, doesn't get enough attention in change management literature. That could be coming into more focus. But change is an incredibly emotional process. Morale is a huge part of defining the success of a change. It's difficult to quantify, which I think is why sometimes it doesn't get the same emphasis as other components of change, but it's extremely important and something I'll talk about throughout the session today. Interested in knowing more about change management and the key kind of theorists or authors on the topic. You may see a few names recurring. John P. Cotter is the one that I tend to kind of gravitate towards. His model for change management, I think, just really makes a lot of sense to me and how I think about it. A lot of his work is kind of drawing from the stages of grief, which is kind of applicable when you think about it. But he does a lot of work and is very well known in the field. You'll also see Kurt Lewin's name come up periodically. He also has a different model for change process mapping. And W. Edwards Deming is another person who's quite prominent. But you'll also see change management come up in books and articles that don't necessarily seem focused on change management. It can pop up in a lot of different contexts as well. So it can be kind of like the extra seasoning in a lot of different dishes. You'll also find that there are different kind of ways of understanding change management, depending on what kind of organization, what kind of industry you're talking about. In business context, a lot of it tends to fall along the lines of project management. So you have a discrete beginning, middle, end, then the next thing, then the next thing, but they're all kind of bounded. Um, I think that the kind of most useful variation in that sense for libraries is continuous improvement. Change management is great, and I think that there's a lot that we can learn from that discourse as well. But libraries, I think, are just always kind of perpetually changing and innovating, and there's some more kind of constant need for change and adaptation as opposed to this kind of fixed cycle structure where it's we do the thing, it's done. Now there's a new thing, and that's done, right? We don't necessarily get a lot of closure when it comes to change series. It's more kind of ongoing variations on the themes in my experience. So continuous improvement, I think, is probably the strongest match for the kinds of changes libraries tend to deal with. But there are other permutations and other kind of frameworks out there that can be really helpful for your specific library, depending on what's going on there and other aspects of your organizational culture. So there's a lot of theory. There are a lot of people writing a lot of books. Why does this matter? Why is this worth talking about? I think it's important because as, you know, we kind of started off saying change is inescapable in library settings. Our institutions are constantly in flux. And primarily, well, I shouldn't say primarily, in part, that's because there are a lot of uncertainties around budgets, staffing, administrative support, user needs, and emerging demands that are always kind of being reconsidered and readdressed. And these things also accumulate, right? You can have changes happening to your budget, your staffing, and your user needs. It's not kind of like you pick one and that's the only kind of area of flux or adaptation you have to deal with. They tend to kind of converge and happen simultaneously. So I think that's one of the reasons this is really important for libraries in particular. The other element of library change is that there's never a kind of opportunity to pause the ongoing daily demands for service delivery and kind of the daily operations of a library while this change, while this new iteration is being developed, cultivated, implemented, assessed, right? There's never a pause button in libraries. The expectation is that you maintain everything you're currently doing and with the same amount of staffing and support, also prepare for the brand new thing. And that I think is very unique to libraries. Not exclusive, but it is kind of a unique situation. Maintaining consistent services while a whole new thing is in development. And again, because staffing doesn't tend to be augmented during those times, it's another reason why having strategies, having more kind of intentional use of our time and energy when a change is coming is very critical because we are already stretched very thinly, and then this is going to add a little more strain to that equation, right? So I think these are the reasons why this is worth talking about. Some change management literature is very abstract. Some of it is more practical, but I think in general, this is really useful for us to think about because we need to be very strategic and very organized around how we deal with change because of all of these pressures and how they impact our organizations and our staff. So, what does change look like in libraries? What are some examples of what we mean by change here? So, change can take a lot of different forms. I have some examples, and if you have a change that you've worked through or something that you feel is a really good example, please feel free to pop that in the chat. I'm always really curious to know more about what kinds of changes people are working through in their organizations. One of my favorite things that I got to participate in was researching and selecting technology for a makerspace, which I actually did back in the day with Elliot, Small World, and figuring out those logistics, getting the equipment, figuring out how it worked, implementing the makerspace. That was one of the most challenging and rewarding kind of change cycles that I've been through. But if you have other examples you want to share, please add those to the chat. Some examples for just to make this more concrete for us today. A public library expanding hours of operation. Upon first glance, this may seem like a fairly straightforward change, just going to be open longer. Okay, that's true, but there are considerations with stretching the existing staff. If you're open later, do you need security now? It's going to cause cost more in terms of your electricity. Your utilities are going to be, at a higher rate. You're going to see more wear and tear on your building. You have to update your website, any posted hours, and then you also have to assess and see if the hours that you've changed to are actually attracting your users, if people are showing up during these new hours as well, right? So this seems like a very kind of, oh, you're just going to be open longer. Very straightforward or streamlined kind of change, but it has all of these moving pieces and all of these component parts to add complexity. And I think that that's what we're talking about when we talk about change management, something that has a lot of tendrils and filaments to it. An archive upgrading their HVAC system. Okay, this is another one where you might say, well, that's maintenance. That's not really a change, but it can have a lot of impact on where's the collection going? Is there a digitization effort and then things are being put in offsite storage? Is it going to become a dark archive after the HVAC is put in place? Are you still offering reference services? Are reference services being moved to a different desk, a different location? Are there still opportunities for people to come in and handle the materials in the reading room? And also, is the HVAC system upgrade happening in anticipation of a need, or is it more dire, right? Did the HVAC go out last week and it's 102 degrees? That type of situation where it's an emergency versus, oh, it's November and we know that based on how long we've had the HVAC system, it probably has another year or two left. Let's proactively and very, in a smooth and organized fashion, replace that. That's awesome if that happens, but sometimes it is a more urgent case. But again, it has a lot of different pressure points, a lot of different people that can be involved in it, and it can affect your users in a lot of different ways. So that's an example. An academic library going through a reorganization. I think we've all gone through reorgs. Sometimes there's a reorg within the reorg. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because I think we've all experienced something along those lines. But different roles can be staffing changes, can be changes with desk assignments, who's sitting where, who's on what team, people trying to upskill, learn new positions. There's just a lot that can happen as a part of a reorg. And then in general, libraries can be embracing change to adapt to different things like budget cuts. You could be weeding your print collection for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's to, make your deaccessioning to make more space for student study. Maybe you're participating in consortial shared print, so you don't need as many duplicate copies. Maybe it's part of a digitization effort. There are a lot of reasons why you could be weeding your print, but it's definitely, part of that change cycle. And then anytime you're moving a standard, if there's a new version of Counter, moving from Mark to BibFrame, that is significant change as well. It affects a lot of your systems, your workflows, a lot of your staffing needs. It's a very transformative thing. And I think you can see from this list how these different changes can get clustered together, right? You could be going through a reorg and budget cuts and weeding your print and moving from Mark to BibFrame all at the same time. So again, just to kind of make this feel a little more concrete, hopefully, this is what we mean by change, and this is why change management can help us shift the perspective or shift the dynamic from kind of, oh, reactive, we just have to survive this, to more kind of methodical, we're going to try to make the best out of the situation even if there is a lot of stress and pressure involved. And that's where the change planning and other aspects really come into play. So from these examples, we can see that there are varying levels of size and complexity, right? You can have kind of smaller changes. You can have things that are really large in scope. Um, Changes can also be elective or imposed, right? Sometimes the library is making a change because it's something on their strategic plan. Sometimes it is something that's been thought through and planned for, and there's buy-in and support, and everyone's on board for it. Oftentimes, as well, change can be imposed, whether that's from an external source, like, oh, your cataloging system is approaching obsolescence. You have a fixed date, and by that time, you have to choose and implement a replacement. It can be imposed kind of within your organization. Your AUL makes a decision, your provost makes a decision that affects the library. So there are different kinds of things that can be kind of imposed. Could even be a change in how data is collected, like for something like iPads or accreditation, that can cause a lot of change as well. So, that's one way of kind of distinguishing change and organizing kind of what type of change are we looking at, and then building your strategy from there. The other kind of piece to work with or think through within your organization is this change in question short term or long term? Sometimes people do pilots and it's designed to be short term. It's meant to be a year. Like an academic library may roll out a program to help attract and retain faculty and give them $500 a year to put towards picking books in their subject area and showing them how to use Gobi or whatever the case may be. But maybe that is something you decide you're only going to do for 2 semesters and then you're going to reevaluate. That's a short-term change as opposed to longer term where it's like, oh, we're going to completely revitalize the way we do reference services or how instruction is organized, right? Like that's meant to be a more kind of long-term modification to the library service. So these are ways you can kind of think through the change and use those pieces of information to inform how you're going to plan the change and work through it from there. But there's a lot of variation here. There's a lot of different paths we can take, a lot of types of change, a lot of variables that can impact how we need to plan and account for it. So how do we navigate this? How do we chart our course? Um, in the literature, you'll see a lot of kind of building block guidance, some kind of foundational you know, guideposts to steer by. These are not eloquent, but these are the ones that I think are really applicable. So I apologize that you'll find better phrasing in the literature, but this is my kind of distillation of it. When you are in that process of trying to look at the change information that you have, and you're trying to kind of deconstruct it a bit to figure out how to plan for it, there are a couple of things that I think really help orient you, regardless of the level of impact you have on a change. You may not be the person responsible for it. Maybe you're a middle manager, maybe you're a part of a team, but just in general, if you have a role to play in in the change cycle, I think these are helpful guideposts. The first thing to do is define success. This may seem really obvious sometimes that the what success looks like can seem like a given. It's like, well, especially with a system migration. The system's live, that's a success. Maybe I mean, that could be true. I would also say maybe, the definition of success could be engagement with the new system. Are people using it? What kind of engagement are you getting out of it? Maybe that's the definition of success. Some things have more straightforward definitions of others, but I think this is a piece where it is beneficial to think very carefully about what success is and have a shared understanding. Try to get an entire team to see what that definition is and agree to it, because that's going to inform so much of your subsequent planning. And so many of your decisions are going to stem from that definition. So try to have a definition of success. Along the way, I would do the best possible to answer the why question. Why are we doing this? Why is this happening? I fully recognize that this can be political. Sometimes you can't be as transparent as you would want to be. But as much as you are able, try to ensure that anybody involved in a change, whether they are leading a team, whether they're the change manager, whether they're you know someone who comes in part-time, whatever the role, they can answer that question. Why are we doing this? And they have an answer that they're comfortable with, even if it's an elevator pitch, right? Everyone should have that understanding because without it, it's very hard to have buy-in and engagement and have that feeling of conviction that what's happening, it has a reason. Even if it's something, even if it's a change that's imposed, that's still a reason, right? If it feels arbitrary and if it feels groundless, people may go along with the change, but they're not going to be really buying into it. And we'll talk a little more about that aspect of change in a couple slides. But answering the why question to the best of your ability, I think is a really great thing to put time into at the outset of change assessment. The other thing, another, these are all challenging, and I'm sorry that they aren't more straightforward, but I feel they do set you up for success in the long run. Focusing on security and trust is really valuable. Defining success and answering the why question helps you get that momentum. It sows the seeds for security and trust. Um, but I think it's very important to remember that, much like we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Within a workplace, it's a real challenge for anyone to adapt to something new or have a growth mindset if they feel like their position is in jeopardy, if they feel they may not have a place in the future of the organization, there has to be kind of a baseline feeling of security in order for people to engage with something new and different. They may really want to, it's not about how good of a worker you are or how much you love the library or your organization, right? I think it's a really fundamental thing. Without that baseline feeling of security, it's very hard for us to be in a learning and growth mode. Um, and it's worth trying to reassure people as much as possible so that they can be in that growth mode. They can feel that sense of security. They can really trust that the process is happening for a reason, that people understand what's at stake, and that they're not being driven by a scarcity mindset. Um, it's a challenge, and again, one of those things that's really hard to quantify, but I think it's worth paying attention to at the beginning of a change and throughout the process. Um, another thing that also helps build trust and security, so kind of tied to it, is assigning tasks and delegating. If you are kind of at a responsibility holder level for a change, it can be kind of tempting to be in the mindset of like, well, I have the vision. I know what's supposed to happen. I don't want to inconvenience people. I'll do these things. And while being considerate of others' workloads is really great, um, making clear assignments and delegating tasks also makes people more included in the change, and it helps ground the change and make them feel like participants. Um, one of the hardest aspects of change, especially really fundamental change in the library, like something that really dramatically alters what's happening, like a reorganization, is that sometimes we lose our feeling of expertise. And that is a real challenge. That is just very hard to deal with, to go from being the person who is the one people go to for answers to needing to read documentation for 20 minutes to figure out, what's on the screen, right? That is very challenging. That's a hard space to be in. Having tasks, having delegated responsibility, having a clear defined role in what's happening can help rebuild that feeling of expertise. And it can be an opportunity for empowerment. And I think that's really what I'm trying to convey here, in not that clear way. But hopefully it's coming through a little bit. So with that foundation in place, there are a couple of other things that I think are really useful. Again, these are kind of practical distillations from the literature. You'll find it written more eloquently and with more kind of pizzazz, but um, being very clear about who is doing what, I think is really important. As much transparency as possible. Again, that goes back to trust, transparency. Um, the timeline, I think, is really important to be clear about, even if it's a range, right? Maybe it may not be a set date. Maybe you just have a range you're working with. Let people know that. I think it's really important to be clear. If it changes, let people know that as well. Um, Again, it's just about managing expectations, being transparent. I feel like a lot of change management is actually about communication. I think that is one of the communication and emotion, I think, are two of the most important elements of change and how we experience it. So I'm a big believer in keeping people informed, providing ongoing updates, providing them consistently. I have some examples that I'll show you in a few minutes. But the other thing I want to say about communication, I've seen this happen. So I just want to lay it out there in case it impacts somebody here. If you are someone is responsible for communicating about change and you're aware of a change that's going to affect somebody's direct reports, please let those managers know before the broader announcement goes out. It's very hard to maintain trust when the manager and the direct reports find out at the exact same time and the manager has no answers. That's a real trust breaking moment, and it's something that can definitely be avoided. So I would just hopefully that will never come up for anyone here, but just I've seen it happen and it's really hard to do damage control on. So I just want to mention it in case it saves somebody heartache later. Um, while you are communicating with people, I think it's also beneficial to check in and ensure that people are absorbing what you share. Like it's one thing to say it, but are people understanding it? Do they get the implications of it? Just having a few kind of casual comprehension check-ins can be really helpful as well. The other thing I want to talk about is that a lot of change management cycles kind of end at a certain point, right? Like, oh, well, the change is over. So that's the end of it. Once your change process is complete, it's not actually over. You will always need to have a maintenance plan as part of your change strategy. The reorganization can technically be done, but without kind of ongoing maintenance, without continuing to check in, continuing to support, the new culture you've set in place, continuing to assess the change that you've implemented, things can really backslide. Um, Not everything that is introduced is going to stick automatically. And so, thinking about especially bigger changes, more kind of that fundamental change as long-term planning, long-term assessment, I think is really important. Your level of engagement will not need to be as intense, but you know, change doesn't automatically stick. There needs to be kind of a follow-up process, and always, I'd say, be mindful that the change you're in the midst of implementing now is also setting the stage for your next change. So if you work through a change with your organization and then it reverts, it backslides, not in a planned way, it just kind of crumbles, that's going to make it a lot harder to design, implement, and get buy-in for the next change that comes up. So try to account for multi-year assessment if possible, and a change being complete does not mean it's actually over. It's like, the horror movies at the end that always have kind of the surprise, oh, there's going to be a sequel. It's maybe a little more like that. So, as I mentioned earlier, communication is a huge part of change, how we experience it, how we plan it, how we manage it, how we check in with each other. Um, Communication planning is a really critical part of change. While you're considering your communication strategy for the change you're working through, I would recommend evaluating a few different aspects. The first is the frequency. How often do you need to communicate with your team? What kind of cadence do you want to establish? Whatever you establish, make sure it's something you can maintain. And if it's going to change over the course of the project, just let people know that. It's fair to say during the first 2 months, when things are more kind of intensive and we're coming to consensus about certain aspects of the upcoming change, we're going to have weekly meetings or we're going to have an email update every 2 days. Once we reach this stage, it's going to shift into weekly emails and we'll meet once a month, right? That's perfectly appropriate, but just kind of be clear and thoughtful about the frequency. Also consider the format of your communication. If you want to have breakout groups, if you want to meet virtually, if hybrid's okay, if you want mainly in-person meetings, depending on your organization. Um, I I confess I have a bias. Um, Whatever is being shared in meetings, I believe should also be kind of synthesized in email and shared in regular updates because email really is our knowledge base for institutional memory in a lot of libraries. We're not going to go to the wiki. We're not going to look at the LibGuide you created. I, I mean, I think the user patterns really are going to be people are going to search their email. So try to anticipate that. Think of that as part of your knowledge base for the change, and structure it so it can be found in an email. Try to think through like how is Outlook going to surface this later, right? And think about the structure of the messaging as well and try to make that consistent so people can skim. Some of these things people may only search for later when they need it, but I think these areas can help make your communication more effective. So I have some examples, got to have templates. Um, so this is an example of an email update, which you could share on a regular basis. Oh, have I shared my screen? Is my screen still shared? Okay. I think I may have just
Your screen is
moved.
still there.
Okay, good. Sorry, I clicked the Zoom tools section and it expanded, and I was worried that I had somehow blocked my screen, my slides. Glad that that's not the case. Okay, so have kind of a set structure for the subject line. This is, one way you could do it. Have an inclusive greeting. Hi team, hi folks, hi everyone. Um, State a little bit about where you are with the change, what's happened since the last update. Reminders about upcoming deadlines or meetings. This is a good place to remind people of what's next on the horizon. Not what's happening in 3 months, but what's happening next week or in the next 2 weeks. Provide links to any relevant trainings, external documentation, things that people need to look at soon, and clear guidance on who needs it and why. I think it's wise to assume that whatever action or follow-up task people are going to do is going to come from their response to this email. They're going to see this email, try to provide all the things that they need to achieve whatever you're asking of them. The odds of people having the bandwidth and the follow-through to go and do other external things, maybe 50-50. It really depends. It really depends. But try to lower the barriers and make it as easy as possible for people to engage. I always try to provide information on who to reach out to with questions or concerns. If you're doing kind of ongoing evaluation of your change, try to include a form, right? If you're doing that kind of assessment, and include thanks or kudos where it feels natural or appropriate. Like don't force it, but so much of library work is invisible labor, and we don't get acknowledged for it enough, and we don't get thanked for it enough. And I think change, especially, is an opportunity for us to show our appreciation for one another in a genuine way. So if that feels natural and appropriate, I personally really encourage that. It's something I've tried to do in a lot of my roles over the years, and it's always been worth the time. Um, so here's an example of what that might look like. So that's my kind of heading. A smart thing would be to put like what week it is, like week 13, whatever. Dear team, Thanks to your outstanding efforts. This is what we've done. This is for a hypothetical like weeding project, but it could be anything. But we've completed the assessment of circ stats on the first floor. We've sent the lists of under circulating titles to departments via their liaisons, and we began discussing ebook options with two of our current vendors. Okay, awesome. This is what we've been doing. Up next, we'll have an all-staff check-in on Thursday. The agenda will be provided no later than, provide the date. As a reminder, this will be a virtual meeting to ensure everyone can participate or access a quality recording if they are unable to make it day of, right? Before the next check-in, please review the project calendar, link to the calendar. All staff should let their managers know if their department's stack shift poses an issue so we can adjust if needed. Okay, so the follow-up action is clear. There's the link, who to follow up with and why. And it just helps kind of ground people so that the goal is that if you just walked up to somebody in the break room or whatever, getting a cup of coffee, and they had a question, someone else could answer it, right? There's kind of shared understanding of where things are in the process, what's coming up next, what do people need to do to support the next phase, right? So this is just an example of how this could be structured, but bullet points are great, consistent subject lines. If there are dates, try to include those, provide links to things that people need in the email if possible, and let them know who to follow up with if that is being asked of them. Okay. So I've thrown a lot of information at you, and change management is a huge topic. If there are three things that you take away from this session, I would hope that it's these 3 points. Change is not inherently positive or negative. It's inescapable. It's going to happen. It can be generative. It can be a wonderful opportunity. It can be corrosive or something in between. The way we approach it and the way we apply strategy to make it accessible, to make it something that we can deconstruct and delegate our work around, helps ensure or helps bolster the odds that it will be generative. But it in and of itself is kind of value neutral in a lot of cases. Change management strategies help us for sure, but I want to be clear, there are no guarantees. It's entirely possible to have a perfectly designed change. You have the best plan imaginable. You have a great team. You have lots of buy-in, and things can not go according to plan just because the components of change are so volatile. There's emotion, there's communication, there's resourcing, there's perception, there's, different visions, right? There are no guarantees. We're trying to make the best and optimize our opportunities. But if you work through a change and it's not ideal, please don't internalize that as a failure or anything like that. Sometimes it just gets messy, and we try to learn from that and hope for the best in the future. But it's not the result of a shortcoming, right? Um, and then lasting change depends on security and trust. Security and trust is what gives people the confidence that's necessary to adapt and learn and innovate and really absorb something new. So those are the three things that I would hope you might take away from this session. There are a couple of resources. I did not put this in a particular style. I should have. I should have put it in like APA or Chicago. Um, but there are a couple of books that I think are really helpful if you're interested in this. Leading Change by John P. Cotter. I mentioned him earlier. The Fifth Discipline, The Art and Practice of the Learning Organization by Peter Senge. This is not technically, I think, a change management book, but being a learning organization is tied to a lot of what we want to achieve through change. So I think it's a very compatible title. I read this book earlier this year. I thought it was so good. Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter by Greg McGowan and Liz Wiseman. It's also really good on audio if you're a fan of audiobooks. Um, but really just like thinking about how to be a generative leader and how to bring out the best in one another. Whether you're a formal leader or just kind of, a colleague, maybe it's peer-to-peer leadership. It doesn't have to be like capital L leader, but just how we support one another and try to model really generative opportunities. You're Not Listening, What You're Missing and Why It Matters by Kate Murphy. Again, not a change management book, but a lot of change has to do with communication. And especially at the planning stage, so much of that is listening and figuring out how to get a point across, how to be an attentive and thoughtful listener, even when things are really stressful. So, actually, even if you're not in the midst of change, it's an amazing book. So, I recommend it regardless. And then Stuck, Diagrams Help by Abby Covert. Abby Covert does a lot of work in information architecture, but this book is all about diagrams, which can be a really valuable tool to help understand maybe what the state the state of library is moving into, or help align kind of on the strategy, what we're going to do when, what our course forward is going to look like. So I highly recommend that book. And then some kind of less traditional resources. It's a little out there, but hopefully it may resonate. Um, Tactical breathing, I think, is really important. Change is really stressful. We can be in a lot of meetings that are just a little overwhelming, and tactical breathing can help us get back to baseline and regulate our stress levels. There's a lot of documentation on this from a military standpoint, but there are other people who talk about like box breathing and stress management. And I think tactical breathing is a really good thing. And you can be in a meeting and no one would even know that you're doing box breathing, right? Like if you need to kind of decompress in a stressful moment, it can be really helpful. And then there's this really lovely toolkit from UC Berkeley. It's a change management toolkit. I wanted to provide a link to that as well. Um, it's not necessarily library focused, but it can help you with that process of kind of breaking down the components of what change you're working through. Who are the invested parties? Who do we need to kind of liaise with? What are our deliverables? How will we know when we've succeeded, right? Kind of that interactive worksheet system is something that they've really done a great job of in this toolkit. So I found that really helpful. And if you have recommendations on resources that you found useful related to change, preparing for it, evaluating it, coping with it, anything related to that, if your readings have shown you something really interesting, a podcast, anything like that, please feel free to share in the chat. This is a great opportunity for us to learn from each other. I want to change over to questions if there are any. But first, I just wanted to say thank you again. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk about change with you all. Thank you for the invitation. And also wanted to share the credits for the slide design because I could not design this myself. So many thanks to Slides Carnival for the template. So with that, I'm happy to pivot over to any questions if there are any. And I also want to take a look at the chat and see what folks have shared.
Yes, we have some examples. Thank you so much for your presentation. We're going to give people some time now to type in any questions or comments they may have. I also went ahead and added some of those last links to the chat as well. So those are there. But if we wanted to hit, there were three examples that were also contributed when you were asking for examples of change. Um,
Yeah,
so we
yeah.
have three here.
Nice, nice. I see a library switched the ILS over the summer. A lot of documentation to update. Oh, documentation updates. That is a huge part of change. Oh my goodness. Yeah, yeah. That's its own project. Documentation updates, workflows to figure out before the semester started. Yep, yep. That is a really big one. Um, Hopefully a positive change. I hope you like your new ILS, but sometimes the new ones take some time to get used to. Someone went through a major renovation on the main floor where it was turned into a student success center, tutoring, advising, writing center, being brought into, oh, okay, so co-location. Yeah, that's a really fundamental change too. Not just in terms of the space, but the kinds of questions that the library staff may answer as people are looking for these other departments. Yeah. Is everyone going to have the same hours? Like lots of little things can pop up as a result of those changes. And then a college has been adding a lot of new programs, need new collections, new LibGuides, new journals, and new types of students. Oh, yeah. That's especially if you have a brand new audience to serve, that's that's a really significant change. Absolutely. I hope those additional needs also came with some additional staffing and funding. That's always the hope, but I know not always the case.
Awesome. Rebecca also went ahead and shared all of the fantastic book titles. I really loved You're Not Listening. I also read that one. It was a really good book.
It's really good.
It was so amazing. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute or drop any chat questions, anything like that. I also did drop a session evaluation link in the chat as well. So please feel free to take time to just let us know how helpful you found today's presentation as well.
Would it be helpful if I put a link to the slides in the chat?
That
Okay,
would be
cool.
great.
I can do that while folks may be typing up their questions. Let me just make sure I've got it available so people with the link can access it. Okay, you can view through the link and I will put that in chat. Alrighty. So if anyone wants to look at the slides, those are available.
Perfect. We're getting a lot of like heart and thumbs up emojis kind of across these messages.
Oh,
So I think
good.
people are finding them helpful.
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, I know like everyone's organization is different and every change you work through is going to have distinctive properties and flavors, but as much as we can kind of come to it forearmed, we can optimize some of those wild variables.
Exactly.